So you would think that this whole orcs are racist thing would be a one and done video, but oh no, my friends, we have 2 articles to cover about this whole thing and a bunch of Twitter nonsense to go along with it. Man, I would have loved to move on to another topic talking about Naughty Dog and how them and Sony are going and striking YouTubers for talking about The Last of Us 2, but oh no, here we go again, folks. Get ready. Welcome back, Pixel Nation Comics Division here. How the hell are you? Anyway, if you haven't already seen my previous video talking about how orcs are racist, go and check it out. It should be one of these 2 areas. Watch that first, and then you'll be caught up on what happened. So, after the initial Twitter battle and comicbook.com article talking about how orcs are racist, a psychology professor, Chris Ferguson, wrote an article on Psychology Today saying that no, they are in fact not racist and that this is a bunch of bullshit. Because it is. Coming from Bounding in the Comics and written by Jorge Arnaz, psychology professor Chris Ferguson accused of slavery apologism and white supremacy for arguing that orcs are not racist. Yep, somebody went there. Slavery apologism. What the actual fuck? This is the most stupidest thing I've heard all day. And I've heard a lot of stupid things too. But one thing I want to point out, when I was in high school, one of my DMs was black. And you know what I never heard him say? That orcs were fucking racist. Chris Ferguson, a professor of psychology at Stetson University, authored a piece on Psychology Today where he argued that orcs were not racist. Now he's under attack from progressive elements for defending his view that the fictional race of orcs, as seen in popular games like Dungeons and Dragons, as well as most works of fantasy and literature, are not racist concepts. And this is what happens when we let moral entrepreneurs into our hobbies. An orc is a fictional race, and by race I mean species. It's not human. It's not a human being at all. It's not even subhuman. It's a orc. You can call it a demi-human. I think that's the term that they use in D&D. It's been a while. But anyway, like I said, it's not real, it's fantasy, and it's not racist. Last week, elements of progressive nerd culture attempted to describe the orc as racist. Many call these elements out for what was an obvious projection on their parts for making such wild comparisons. Dr. Ferguson also responded to the description by writing an article in Psychology Today with the headline of "No, orcs aren't racist." Because they aren't. Now, before we go and jump into the Psychology Today article, let's go and take a look at some of the tweets. Oh man, they are fantastic. After publishing the article, Dr. Ferguson was accused of being, and get this folks, a slavery apologist and a white supremacist by Monkey Paw Games' Nicholas Maskey and the official Swordfall Twitter account. I've never heard of any of these fucks. In my honest opinion, Psychology Today and Chris Ferguson take time out of their busy schedule of slavery apologism to talk about how orcs aren't racist. I'm glad all the white dude racism understanders have logged on to tell us biopic what racism is and how slavery worked. Dude doesn't fucking talk about slavery in the article. He only talks about how orcs aren't racist, so not sure where the fuck you're getting this from, buddy. Go wash your fucking legs, herbs. What the fuck is a herb? Besides the shit you grow in your garden and maybe you smoke. I would say that this shit can't get more retarded than this, but it fucking does. Wow, look at what he retweets. That's a shitty ass dude. You know what? I think I need to break out the SJW voice.
IDK, what you mean, Brandon? He's obviously a well-respected psychologist. And any RTS of white supremacist or white supremacist logic is clearly not an endorsement. just a degular white dude with opinions about racism and slavery on the internet. Oh, I forgot. When you're white, you can claim that those things don't matter.
God, that fucking hurts.
I forgot for a second the rule of white.
Anyway, on to the Psychology Today article. Now, I'm not going to read all of it, but I do want to hit the key highlights, which is important to what Dr. Ferguson is trying to say. No, orcs aren't racist. Why cultural critics keep arguing about the wrong things. By Christopher J. Ferguson, PhD. Now, he's talking about the CBR article and obviously the tweets that went and fueled it. So he brings up that there are 3 main points that they're trying to make. Playing in Dungeons & Dragons either as or fighting against orcs may promote racist attitudes in real life. The origins of the orc in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is based in an anti-Asian or, alternatively, anti-African racism. And 3, the concept of race in fantasy role-playing games or fiction novels or movies is problematic, as it implies a kind of biological essentialism. Okay, so now that Dr. Ferguson has gone and set up the pins, let's go and watch him knock them down. Essentially, if you say goblins are evil monsters, a concept that long predates Tolkien, this is racist because it robs the fictional creatures of their agency and defines them by their race. As we debate the racism of a race that doesn't exist in the real world, it helps to revisit an exceptionally earnest 60 Minutes documentary segment from the 80s on Dungeons & Dragons. Today's moral panic is over race, and racism in the game has strange moralistic echoes of the 1980s panic, with the exception that today, there aren't any bodies of dead teenagers for the moral entrepreneurs to point to. God, I love that. Moral entrepreneurs. That is so fucking spot on. The first claim regarding D&D is the easiest to consider. Put simply, there is no evidence that playing Dungeons & Dragons, or for that matter, watching or reading Lord of the Rings, contributes to racist attitudes and behaviors in real life. You hear that? There is absolutely no fucking evidence that this contributes to racism. These people are full of shit. Generally, whether looking at an action video game, 13 Reasons Why, or even sexualization in media, the evidence suggests that fictional media portrayals simply don't produce the kinds of attitude or behavior changes society's pro-cultures on the right and left like to worry about. The idea that attitudes can shift from media to real life is based on a theory called cultivation theory, but cultivation theory has had a rough road evidence-wise, even for news media. So what is cultivation theory? Cultivation theory examines the long-term effects of television. The primary proposition for cultivation theory states that the more time people spend living in the television world, the more likely they are to believe social realities aligning with realities portrayed on television. So when SJW say that orcs are racist or watching these types of movies will make you racist, they're using bad science. It's not real. There is no evidence to prove what they are talking about. They are merely projecting. The second critique stems from the attempts of scouring the writings of Tolkien himself for any evidence of racial inclinations. The notion that certain creatures are by nature evil or malicious permeates folklore in both West and East. Tolkien hardly invented the concept. And if you've done any kind of studying of folklore, you would know that this is the case. The Fae, or fairies, they're called the fair folk because they're not. They're very malicious and capricious creatures. And you can find this all throughout mythology. Just look at Greek mythology. But are orcs meant to be analogous for certain real-life races? The method of modern critical studies of media appears to be to scour the writings of an author for the worst possible thing they ever said, and interpret this in the least generous way. And this is what SJWs do. They look for the worst possible thing that you've ever said, and treat it with absolutely zero generosity. Because obviously, if you say something off color, you have to be a white supremacist. Despite the one quote above, Tolkien generally disavowed the notion that orcs were intended to portray an actual human culture. Some might argue that the author's intent doesn't matter, death of the author, But there's an incoherence here. One can argue from the author's letters to show intent, only to claim intent doesn't matter when the larger evidence doesn't fit the narrative. Essentially, this question boils down to something of a Rorschach card. If you want to see racism in Tolkien's orcs, you will. If you don't, you won't. This is the problem with modern discourse, and particularly discourse on Twitter. If the evidence doesn't support your narrative, you simply throw it out and say that it doesn't matter. Related to the third point, in Dungeons & Dragons, the depiction of orcs is entirely monstrous, with few clear references to any actual human culture. Indeed, in the first edition of the game, they looked more pig-like than anything, and they are portrayed wearing vaguely European-style armor, wielding European polearms. Orcs are generally, though not always, depicted as inherently evil. They're one of the many bad guy races in D&D. It's this depiction of biological essentialism that the moral virtues of a creature can be defined by its biological origins as a race, again species, that some progressives appear to object to. The problem is that these SJWs is that they're taking real-world concepts such as biological essentialism and trying to project it into a fantasy world that doesn't exist. Now I'm gonna go and skip the first part of this paragraph. I already kind of covered stuff like this in my previous video. The idea that in reality in D&D we're talking about a different species, not an actual race, race being the anthropological term that we use amongst humans. Anyway, then again, discoursing on the Mendelian genetic intent of Dungeons & Dragons, use of race, invites the absurd, and it absolutely does. Of course, the idea of monstrous races or species is nothing created by D&D, but rather the notion of monsters imbued with evil by their very monstrous origins in common to many folklores worldwide. And again, this isn't something that is just being made up. It has pre-existed in folklore throughout the fucking ages. If you actually went and looked into folklore, you would know this to be fucking true. To appease the critical theorists on this score would require a massive scouring not only of D&D games, but of fiction, mythology, and folklore. Again, this has existed throughout all of time when man has been able to communicate, tell stories, and write them down. Now, this is a very long article, and I do suggest you go and read it. It is pretty good. No, orcs aren't racist, and D&D isn't promoting racism. There's no good scientific evidence to back up the claims of this new woke wave of moral outrage and policing. There are real issues around race and racial inequities we need to work on in the US and across the world. But as far as D&D goes, let's try and tune out the moral entrepreneurs as best we can and get back to gaming. And that's pretty well said. We should just tune these fuckers out and get back to our hobbies. And quite frankly, I think we need to do a little gatekeeping to clean house. Now I want to go and jump back to the Bounding into Comics article. And line 15 goes to Dr. Ferguson's defense. These are utterly vile, out of context smears against Dr. Ferguson from someone attempting to discredit his work. Professor Ferguson is not a Gamergate supporter, a slavery apologist, or an advocate of spanking. All this over an article about orcs. Yes, all this over an article about orcs. So ridiculous. And then you have D, Owl's Eyes, responding to Dr. Ferguson and how he can go and correct the situation. Hey, you're being dragged pretty hard on left Twitter right now. So here's some ideas for how you can fix the situation. 1. Delete this thread. 2. Delete the article you wrote. 3. Consider that maybe as a white man, you're not qualified to write about race in any capacity. Yes, because if you have pale skin, such as myself, you're not allowed to have thoughts on what racism is. That's fucking ridiculous. They, them.
Sheer fucking hubris.
And the rest of the article is pretty much Dr. Ferguson defending himself on Twitter. I suggest you go and read the tweets. It's actually worth reading. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time to go and cover everything, so I'm going to go and jump down to the bottom of the article. Fantasy fiction has been under siege for the last few years, with depictions of orcs being one of the main points of contention. They use orcs to go after fantasy's greats like J.R.R. Tolkien, claiming that they are promoting racism or their depiction is racist. But it hasn't just been orcs. Fired Marvel Comics and Star Wars author Chuck Wingdings declared that the entire genre of epic fantasy was too white and too male and too straight, insinuating that the genre needs to have a self-imposed diversity quota. If you read fantasy, you know that the majority of it is based off of Europe in the Middle Ages. And that doesn't mean that there isn't room for other types of fantasy, but it is up to other authors to go and create those worlds and not criticize modern fantasy for being too white, too male, and too straight. Come up with your own shit. If it's good, it will sell. If it doesn't, it will fail. And that's exactly the issue, because SJWs have absolutely zero creativity. They can't go and develop their own world and have it be mass marketable to the public. Because nobody likes agenda being placed in front of story. That's what you're gonna get. That's why we have Safe Space in Snowflake and Marvel. It's the reason why we have Gotham High coming from DC. It's garbage. Anyway, that's all I have for tonight, folks. I'll catch you next time. Holy shit, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Well, since you're here, you might as well do me a small favor. If you're new to the channel, go and click that subscribe button, bash that bell for notifications, make sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, and also share it on social media. I even have a P.O. box in case you want to go and send me fan mail. I never get any, so you could actually be the first one. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all my Subscribe Star supporters. Without you, I would probably still be doing this. But in all seriousness, thank you very much, and I do appreciate the support. And I want to give a huge shout out to Toxic Manflu for joining the well hello there big spender tier, as well as Satakur 7th Legion for joining the Take My Money Damn It tier. You guys are awesome.